Does the state wish to give a rebuttal argument at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Judge. I got to clear something up real quick, because when you look at the premeditation jury instruction, passion in there does not mean that because you're in love with someone and they don't love you back, you can go start killing people. That's not what that means. That is a passion that's born of provocation. Somebody does something real bad to you. You know, somebody beating on your kid and you just lose it and you kill them. You come home and your spouse is cheating on you, so you kill somebody because of that. That is the passion, and it's born of provocation. Not oh, I love Artesia so much. I think I'm going to go kill a bunch of people that are in the way. That's not what it contemplates. Anger, rage, sudden excitement, that sort of thing is what that contemplates. And I want to talk about, I thought that he didn't mention Neuschatz at all, and I guess it makes sense, because that guy didn't even look at the facts of the case. He didn't mention the idea of a false confession. He forgot about that, because obviously it's not a false confession. But I want to take you back just a little bit to go to this premeditation idea, right? Where did the defendant start his day? What did he say in his statement? He was at Regional 1. You remember that. He went to Regional 1. Why was he at Regional 1? What was he doing at Regional 1? That's where Kennedy was being born. Why is he there? This guy hasn't been paying any attention to Danielle for months. We know, based on the prior text, that he doesn't even want the baby. So why? Why is Brandon Isabelle at Regional 1? To try to take down Danielle's defenses. He doesn't care about that baby. He doesn't want that baby. But he's planning on killing that baby. That's what he's doing up there. He didn't go to Regional 1 because he loves Kennedy. Because if he loves Kennedy, he wouldn't have thrown Kennedy in the river. He didn't go up to Regional 1 because he loves Danielle. Because if he loved Danielle, he wouldn't have shot her in the head 5 times. That's planning, ladies and gentlemen. And again, forget about that definition he was giving you of passion, because that's not the definition for passion. That is planning. It's premeditation. What does he do the rest of the day? He goes to the surgery center for his kids, and he goes home to Lathbury. And think about this. He goes home to Lathbury. It's just later on that day. And we see him going into Lathbury. It's about 7:58. What's he wearing? He's wearing those slides. He comes right back out of Lathbury, and he has done what? He's done what? He has lured Danielle to the MAPCO. His heart isn't just filled with love for Artesia. He wants to kill Danielle. That's why he lures her to the MAPCO. Long time goes by. He drives all the way to MAPCO, and we have his GPS taking him all the way to MAPCO. What else do we have? We have text messages between him and Artesia. And what's Artesia saying? Who can blame Artesia for not wanting to be with a guy that's having a baby with another woman? That's kind of normal, right? But is she texting him going, yeah, kill, kill, kill. You're not going to have me unless you wipe out these people. No, she's just texting normal things. They're planning on going out and have dinner in those texts. She went and bought him food from Dixie Queen. There's none of that kind of madness right there. They're just having normal conversations. It's up, it's down, it's in. You know, they're on the rocks. Seems like maybe a toxic relationship, but she's not inspiring him or encouraging him to kill anybody. I mean, we know he's on the scene, but he gets her, and think about his statement too, and his statement is corroborated by all the proof, but he lures her to the scene at Levi and Sedgwick, right? What's going on there? It's a dark scene. We know he already cased the place because he went to Mart Road earlier in the day. That day, he went to Mart Road. Mart Road is just like Levi and Sedgwick. It's right next to Levi and Sedgwick. And he lures her out there, says his car's messing up. His car's not messing up. He gets her out there, and he's got his gun with him. He has his 9mm gun with him. Why? Why in the world would he lure Danielle out and bring his gun with him? That's weird. Seems like maybe he had a plan to kill Danielle. And he gets her out there, and he shoots her 5 times. 5 times in the head. You know, We can just skip that one. He shoots her 5 times in the head. Car rolls back. It's pretty obvious he's the one that shot her, right? They didn't even argue against that. 9mm Hanaday rounds laying on the ground, pile of glass, car rolls back, just like he said. Remember, he's the first one that said that. He's the first one that said he used 9mm. He's the first one that said he shot her, and the car rolls back 20, 30 feet. What does he say he does?
Patrick Brown, Organized Crime Division.
What does he say he does? He pulls Danielle out of the car, pulls her body out. What kind of passion is that?
Turn it off.
He's just trying to get rid of the body, right? He grabs Kennedy and does what? Puts her in his car. Is that okay? What's that? That's kidnapping. He had no right to take Kennedy and put her in his car after he killed the mother. It's not passion, that's planning. That's planning. He brought the bullets with him, he brought the gun with him, and he aimed it right at her head, and he fired it 5 times. That's premeditation. It's premeditation. Now, the inspiration is Artesia. He's worried about losing Artesia. That's why he killed her, but it's not because of some passion. He planned it. He planned it for days. What is it? What happened? How about the Google search, right? He's searching on Google about whether or not shell casings can be traced back to a gun. Was it a passionate Google search? No. He sat there and he typed in the words and he searched and he found out, probably, yeah, they can trace guns back to bullets. And what does he do with the gun? He throws the gun away. Passion? No, that's planning. That's planning to get away with the murder. But what does he do with the baby? What does he do with baby Kennedy? He puts her in her car and he drives all the way back to Cordova. What does that mean? He's planning on how to get rid of, he's trying to figure out how to get rid of baby Kennedy. Trying to figure out, how can I get rid of this baby? What can I do with this baby? He said in his statement, I got to kill that baby because I didn't want to be a single parent. Yeah, the baby's in the way. Baby Kennedy's in the way. But he knew what he was going to do because he drove all the way out there, 30-minute drive all the way out to Lathbury. And what's he wearing when he walks in the door at Lathbury at about 10:24 p.m.? He's wearing the murder slides. The slides with Danielle's blood on them. He's wearing them when he walks in. He's not wearing them when he walks out because he put them in a bag and he put his murder clothes in a bag and he put it in the trunk of his car so as to hide it, so nobody could find it. That's planning. Maybe not the best planning, but it's definitely planning. He goes all the way down to Mud Island. Is that a passionate killing, or is that a long, long bit of planning on how he's going to get rid of that baby? Drives all the way down to Mud Island. Now he's had the baby for, I don't know, an hour or so. Is he still killing the baby because of the undying love that he has for Artesia? Just some passion? You know, he's planning to kill the baby. He's planning. He's trying to figure out, what am I going to do with this baby? Because we see his car go over A.W. Willis Bridge, photograph of his tag. We see the white Chevy Malibu driving up and down Island Drive, looking, searching. Where am I going to dump the baby? Where am I going to get rid of this baby? How am I going to kill this baby? And again, why did he throw the gun in the river? That's planning. He told them that those Adidas slides that he had on had her blood on it, had Danielle's blood on them. What did they have on them? Danielle's blood. That's corroboration for his statement. What else did he have on that whole time? The whole time during that interview. Remember what he had on his feet. He had those socks on his feet. Hours into the interview, after they brought him down to the river and he's pointing out where he left the baby, he had the socks on with what? With Danielle's blood on them. He had the black socks pulled up over him. He said he threw baby Kennedy in the river. And we found her hat right down there by the river. Some hour and a half after he kidnapped her from the scene where he killed her mother. What does he do after he kills her? He runs to Walgreens. Or he drives to Walgreens. And we know he drives to Walgreens because we have his GPS, and he gets at Walgreens and we see the video of his car circling around Walgreens, and he backs his car in and he goes inside Walgreens and he buys some things. He buys rose for Artisha. And he buys a card. Remember what the card said? What did the card say? Dear Artisha, dear Cookie, whatever, we're going to raise Kennedy together. We're going to raise the baby I just threw in the river together. Love, Brandon. What else is he doing though? At 12:06, around midnight, when he gets to Walgreens. And remember 12:06. Remember what's happening at 12:06? 12:06 was the very time, the very minute that Danielle Hoyle was declared dead. She's been sitting in a ditch all this time with her blood soaking in with the water running down the ditch. And a paramedic has finally declared her dead at 12:06. And at that very minute, what is this guy doing? He's sitting in his car at the Walgreens parking lot. What's he doing in the car? Writing a little love note to Cookie. What else is he doing in the car? He's writing texts, sending texts to who? To Danielle. Kiss the baby for me. Well, I guess you're asleep. That's diabolical. That is diabolical planning is what that is. Absolutely. Setting up his alibi. Sending text messages to the woman who he just fired 5 shots into her head. Talking about the baby that he just threw in the river. But then what does he do? Gotta get rid of some more evidence, right? Jumps in his car. GPS's his way right on down to Walmart. We see him on the video. The familiar Chevy, the familiar car he's driving. Chevy Malibu. We see a figure get out and drop off what turns out to be the car seat. The car seat. The last known refuge. The last little piece of comfort that baby Kennedy had before he pulled her out of it. So yeah, his motive was to kill these people, to kill Kennedy and to kill Danielle so he could clear the deck, so he could be with Artisha. But he's not under any kind of passion. He's not under any kind of provocation. That's just his plan. That's just what he needs to do, what he feels like he needs to do. I want y'all to think about Kennedy, okay? Kennedy, sitting down there by the river. Kennedy, 45 hours old. And he puts her down there by the river. And she can't walk, right? She's not in that when he puts her down in the river. She can't walk. She can't swim. She can't hold her head up. She can't make a phone call. She's just left down there by the river. What she needed at that moment was what? She needed a blanket. She needed her car seat. She needed April. She needed the beautiful family that he just lured her away from, that had just showered that little baby with love for the hour that they had her. That's what she needed. That's what Kennedy needed. What did she get? She got lured away by this guy who was planning to kill her. She got lured away by him. What else did she get? She got dragged down to Levi and Sedgwick, and you've seen Levi and Sedgwick. That ain't no place for a baby. What else did she get? She had to sit in that car a foot or two away from 5 gunshots. 5 loud gunshots that must have almost burst her little eardrum. She's only 45 hours old, and she's already subject to 5 gunshots 2 feet from her head. Most of us live our whole lives without having experienced that. But that's not all she got. She got to watch those bullets enter the head and neck of her mother that had just given birth to her. What else did she get? She got to watch this guy drag her mother out of the car and throw her on the side of the road like a piece of garbage. But that's not all. What else did she get?
Pardon me. I'll be right with you. Mr. Christensen, I hate to interrupt your closing any more than it already has been.
Thank you, Judge.
But I've been asked to take a break by one of the jurors. So I'm happy to bring them back so that you can finish. But I don't know what their needs are. I don't know if it's a bio break. I don't know if it's a medication break. But I have to give them a break.
Oh, yes, ma'am. No, I don't want to.
All right, welcome back. It is now 3:14. We're a little early. Thank you for communicating your needs. While it's not customary that we interrupt counsels, I can't have you there needing a bio break or medication or food. So if you have additional wants and needs, let us know. Don't hesitate. We are here to take care of you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Judge. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now I have to start over. Just kidding. All right, well, I was talking about baby Kennedy, okay? And I was talking about the needs of a 45-hour-old baby, right? What does a 45-hour-old baby need? Baby needs comfort, right? Baby needs to be held. The baby needs to be kept warm. The baby needs a mother. The baby needs a father. The baby needs a real father. But what did baby Kennedy get? What did she get? She got lured away from her family, from the family that had just given her all that unconditional love that a little baby needs, showering her with all the things that a baby needs. For 1 hour. She got lured away from that, and she got brought down to Levi and Sedgwick, where she was in the car when 5 shots rang out. That's what she got. She was in the car when her mother got shot 5 times in the head and neck. She was in the car when her mother got dragged out of the car and dumped on the side of the road like a piece of garbage. Then she got kidnapped. She got taken out of that car and put in the white Chevy with him. And she gets driven all the way back out to Lathbury, and she gets driven all the way back down to Mud Island. A trip with this kidnapper that lasted longer than the time she was able to spend with her grandma, longer than the time she was able to spend with her family. And then what does he do? He gets down to the river. She was in her car seat, but he takes her out of her car seat. Do we think during all that trip that the guy that wants to kill her is comforting her in any way? Do we think he gave her a bottle? Do we think he changed her diaper? Do we think he hugged her? Do we think he did anything to comfort that little baby? He gets out there, and what's the first thing he does? He takes her out of her seat. He takes her out of her seat. He takes her out of the last vestige of comfort that she had. It's February. It's 11:20 at night. It's cold. It's raining. It's raining, that cold steel rain that you get in February that we've all ducked and run from. And he walks down that old, decrepit boat ramp. There's rocks. There's mud. There's trash. There's old dead bushes and grass. And he walks down there and he gets her right to the water's edge. And this hat really should tell you, this is her hat. Look how tiny this thing is. And he walks out there and he gets to the water's edge. The Wolf River. The Wolf River, right where it goes into the Mississippi River. It's a dangerous river. It's cold. It's 38 to 42 degrees cold. It's so cold that your body will go immediately into hypothermia if you don't get out super quick, but the little baby's not going to get out of it super quick. There's dangerous currents. There's unpredictable currents. There are catfish and creatures in that river. It's dark. It's full of mud and silt and rocks. Premeditation. Because what does he do? Grabs her by her feet and throws her in. And her hat just falls right there by the edge. And as she's circling the water, going into that dark, cold void, what does he do? He just walks away. He just walks away. Let's think about intent and premeditation with respect to that act. Okay? What did he think? What do we think he intended when he took her out of her little car seat? What do we think he intended when he drove her all the way down to Mud Island? What do we think he intended when he drove her right to the boat dock? What do we think this guy intended when he took her out of that car seat? What do we think he intended when he took her away from her blanket on that frigid February night? What do we think he intended when he took her away from her mittens on that frigid February night? What did he intend? He intended to kill her. That, ladies and gentlemen, is premeditation, and that is also the most egregious kind of aggravated child neglect that one can imagine. Putting a little baby like that in that situation. It's cold, it's callous, it's premeditated murder. Now April Campbell deserves justice for what happened to her family. She lost her 27-year-old daughter. She lost her 27-year-old daughter. And we kind of lose sight of that because we talk a lot about baby Kennedy, but 27 years old. Murdered. 27 years old, 2 days after giving birth. Happy as she could be. She didn't need him. She didn't care about him. She would have been just fine without him. But he killed her when she was 27 years old. What else did April lose? What else did her family lose? She lost her little granddaughter. April Campbell got to spend an hour, 1 hour with her granddaughter. She deserves justice, ladies and gentlemen. Danielle Hoyle, Kennedy Hoyle, they were people. We talk about all these legal terms and we're having all our arguments and we have all the autopsy photos and all the jargon and all the mumbo jumbo, but don't lose sight of the fact. They were people and they mattered. You know, I've been doing this a long time. And when you have a case like this, it gets in your soul. It really does set with you. It leaves a mark on you, and it never goes away. It never does. And we've had this case for a long time, and when I get to this point, it's difficult. It's difficult to give it up. It really is. But now's the time. Now's the time for us to give the case to you. For us to give the case to you to make a decision, and we know that you'll do the right thing. We know that you'll do the right thing with the case. I'm going to ask you to bring back the verdict that common sense demands, the verdict that common sense dictates, the verdict that all the evidence dictates, the verdict that justice absolutely demands. Brandon Isabelle, he's guilty of the premeditated murder of Danielle Hoyle. He is guilty of the premeditated murder of Kennedy Hoyle. He's guilty of the aggravated child neglect of Kennedy Hoyle, and he's guilty of the murder and the perpetration of the aggravated child neglect of Kennedy Hoyle. And he's also guilty of the especially aggravated kidnapping of Danielle. I keep saying Danielle, of Kennedy Hoyle. And we really do appreciate your time, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a long, long road, and we appreciate your time.
When you retire to the jury room, you will first select one of your members as foreperson who will preside over your deliberations. When you have reached a verdict, you will return with your decision to this courtroom, and your foreperson will deliver the appropriate verdict form to the court. The defendant has been charged with several crimes. The crime charged in each count of the indictment is a separate and distinct offense. The number of charges is no evidence of guilt, and this should not influence your decision in any way. It is your duty to consider the evidence that relates to each charge and to return a separate verdict for each count of the indictment. Your decision on one charge, whether it is guilty or not guilty, should not influence your decision on any of the other charges. The defendant may be found guilty or not guilty of any or all of the offenses charged. Your finding as to each crime charge must be stated in your verdict. If you find the defendant guilty on all counts from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, you should convict on all. If you find from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt one or more counts guilty and have a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the other count or counts, you should convict on the counts you are satisfied by a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of and acquit on the others. If you have a reasonable doubt as to the guilt on all, you should acquit on all. In deciding the guilt or innocence of the defendant, you shall first consider the offense charged in count 1 of the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing, beyond a reasonable doubt, you shall return a verdict of guilty for that offense. If you unanimously find the defendant not guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing, or if you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt of that offense, your verdict must be not guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing. And you shall then proceed to consider whether or not the defendant is guilty of the next lesser included offense in order from greatest to least within count 1 of the indictment. You shall not proceed to consider any lesser included offenses unless you have first made a unanimous determination that the defendant is not guilty of the immediately preceding greater offense, or you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt of that offense. If you have a reasonable doubt of the guilt of the defendant as to all offenses charged and included in count 1 of the indictment, you shall return a verdict of not guilty and proceed to the next count. Verdict form. The charged offense in the indictment is first-degree murder, premeditated killing. The lesser included offenses within the indictment are as follows: second-degree murder, reckless homicide, criminally negligent homicide. When you consider your verdict in the indictment, you will first inquire whether the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing as charged in the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be: we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing as charged in the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant not guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing as charged in the indictment, or if you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of his guilt of this offense, your verdict must be not guilty as to this offense, and then you shall proceed to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not of the lesser included offenses in order of their consideration as set out in these instructions. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of a lesser included offense in the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be: we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of blank as included in the indictment. Insert in said blank space the lesser included offense. If you find the defendant guilty, you can convict him of only one of the above named offenses charged and included in the indictment. If upon all the proof you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt of the offenses charged and included in the indictment, under the law defined and explained to you, it is your duty to acquit him, and your verdict should be: we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of count 1. You will write your verdict as to the indictment on the outside of the jacket and sign one of your names to the verdict as foreperson. After you reach a verdict in count 1 of the indictment, you will next inquire as to your verdict in count 2. You will use the same rules in this count as you were instructed to use in the previous count. The charged offense in count 2 of the indictment is first-degree murder, premeditated killing. The lesser included offenses within the indictment are as follows: second-degree murder, reckless homicide, criminally negligent homicide. When you consider your verdict in the indictment, You will first inquire whether the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing as charged in the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing as charged in count 2 of the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant not guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated killing as charged in the indictment, or if you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of his guilt of this offense, your verdict must be not guilty as to this offense. And then you shall proceed to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the lesser included offenses as set out in these instructions. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of a lesser included offense in the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of blank as included in count 2 of the indictment. If you find the defendant guilty, you can convict him of only one of the above named offenses charged and included in the indictment. If upon all the proof you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt of the offenses charged and included in the indictment, under the law defined and explained to you, it is your duty to acquit him, and your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of count 2. You will write your verdict as to count 2 of the indictment on the outside of the jacket and sign one of your names to the verdict as foreperson. After you reach a verdict in count 2 of the indictment, you will next inquire as to your verdict in count 3 of the indictment. You will use the same rules in this count as you were instructed to use in the previous count. The charged offense in count 3 of the indictment is first-degree murder, killing, and perpetration of aggravated child neglect. The lesser included offenses within this indictment are as follows: second-degree murder, reckless homicide, criminally negligent homicide. When you consider your verdict in the indictment, you will first inquire whether the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder, killing, and perpetration of aggravated child neglect, as charged in the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, killing, and perpetration of aggravated child neglect as charged in count 3 of the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant not guilty of first-degree murder, killing, and perpetration of aggravated child neglect as charged in the indictment, or if you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of his guilt of this offense, your verdict must be not guilty as to this offense. And then you shall proceed to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the lesser included offense as set out in these instructions. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of a lesser included offenses in the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of blank as included in count 3 of the indictment. If you find the defendant guilty, you can convict him of only one of the above named offenses charged and included in the indictment. If upon all the proof you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt of the offenses charged and included in the indictment under the law defined and explained to you, it is your duty to acquit him, and your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of count 3. You will write your verdict as count 3 of the indictment on the outside of the jacket and sign one of your names to the verdict as foreperson. After you reach a verdict in count 3 of the indictment, you will next inquire as to your verdict in count 4 of the indictment. You will use the same rules in this count as you were instructed to use in the previous count. The charged offense in count 4 of the indictment is aggravated child neglect. The lesser included offense within the indictment is as follows: child neglect. When you consider your verdict in the indictment, you will first inquire whether the defendant is guilty of aggravated child neglect, as charged in the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of aggravated child neglect, as charged in count 4 of the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant not guilty of aggravated child neglect as charged in the indictment, or if you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of his guilt of this offense, your verdict must be not guilty as to this offense, and then you shall proceed to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the lesser included offense as set out in these instructions. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of a lesser included offense in the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of child neglect as included in count 4 of the indictment. If upon all the proof, you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt of the offenses charged and included in the indictment, under the law defined and explained to you, it is your duty to acquit him, and your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of count 4. You will write your verdict as count 4 of the indictment on the outside of the jacket and sign one of your names to the verdict as foreperson. If, after you reach a verdict in count 4 of the indictment, you will next inquire as to your verdict in count 5 of the indictment. You will use the same rules in this count as you were instructed to use in the previous count. The charged offense in count 5 of the indictment is especially aggravated kidnapping. The lesser included offenses within the indictment are as follows: aggravated kidnapping, false imprisonment. When you consider your verdict in the indictment, you will first inquire whether the defendant is guilty of especially aggravated kidnapping as charged in the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of especially aggravated kidnapping as charged in count 5 of the indictment. If you unanimously find the defendant not guilty of especially aggravated kidnapping as charged in the indictment, or if you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of his guilt of this offense, your verdict must be not guilty as to this offense. And then you shall proceed to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the lesser included offense as set out in these instructions. If you unanimously find the defendant guilty of a lesser included offense in the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt, your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of blank as included in count 5 of the indictment. If you find the defendant guilty, you can convict him of only one of the above named offenses charged and included in the indictment. If upon all the proof, you unanimously have a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt of the offenses charged and included in the indictment under the law defined and explained to you, it is your duty to acquit him, and your verdict should be, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of count 5. You will write your verdict as count 5 of the indictment on the outside of the jacket and sign one of your names to the verdict as foreperson.